Okay, hopefully there isn't too much background noise here. I'm driving, and I don't know how much of this is coming through, but hopefully it's not too bad. Obviously, I'm on the road, and I was driving past this giant cemetery. Burial plots as far as the eye could see, and it really got my mind racing. And for whatever reason, I thought I'm going to share the racing with you, whether you like it or not, I suppose. The idea of existence and non-existence is something that's so difficult to wrap our minds around. The idea that one day I will just cease to exist here is so wild. And it's interesting, as you get older, you start seeing more and more people completing their journey in that way. And it becomes very real for you, no matter how much you avoid thinking about it on a daily basis like we all do, to avoid that existential crisis, as it were. Well, one day I'm not going to exist. That's very strange. And all those people buried in the ground there had a life just like mine. They had experiences like mine, and they went through a lot of the same things that I've gone through and you've gone through too, and they had their time alive and conscious here, and then it was done. And it's interesting, right? We have this angst about that situation just because we don't know who we are, where we are, and why we're here, right? All of that information is withheld from us. Accordingly, we very justifiably get anxiety about the idea that this is going to end at some point in time, the conscious experience, and we don't know what comes next. But if you think about it, before you were born here and conscious in this place, you were very much unconscious, at least as far as we can remember, right? You just had no idea it was going on. You had no idea that all those people were having experiences here and conscious, and you read about them in history books or obituaries in the newspaper, and you learn that they had lives here when you are here also, but before you came here, you didn't know anything about any of it. It was completely off your radar, very literally. You were just not conscious, at least as far as we know, right? Sort of similar to a night where you don't have a dream and you go to sleep and then you wake up and you remember closing your eyes and drifting off, and then you remember coming back into consciousness in the world, and in between it's kind of like, what happened there? Where was I? What's going on? And it's kind of similar, right? How we have no awareness of what was happening until we're in it here. And perhaps there is much more that we will be aware of when we leave the conscious experience here, in some way, shape, or form, that we are obviously not told about for whatever reason while we are here. But still, even going into all of that, the idea of non-existence is a tough one. Even right now as I'm speaking, one day I'm just not going to be doing this. I'll be gone. That's wild stuff, right? And we all come to terms with that in our own way. And how we live our lives has a direct impact on how much that affects us. Because if we can find that way that it was intended to be, I think you lose a lot of that anxiety about what will come in the future when you're no longer here. Of course, everybody has the more mundane concerns about what will happen to family and all the people you know, and you hope that they'll be okay without you and all that stuff. That's just natural for anybody to think about. But I'm just speaking more broadly about just the concept that one day you will not be conscious here. If you are living your life to the best of your ability as you were intended to do here, the anxiety about that kind of dissipates a little bit. I did the best that I could, and that's all that can be asked of you, really. The whole burial thing is interesting, too, while I'm thinking about it. I need to mention it, of course, how we take these bodies that we're in and then we put them in a casket and lower them into the ground. At least in the United States of America, that's a very common practice, and in other places in the world. But many cultures will burn the bodies and turn them into ashes and then keep the ashes somewhere. And going back to the problem of not knowing who we are, what we're doing here, what's going on, we can't make the proper decision about what we should do with these bodies when they're no longer functioning because we don't know what's going on enough to make the right decision. Which adds to the anxiety as well. Well, what do I tell them to do with my body when I'm gone? I want to do the right thing. And when you look around in nature, most of the bodies are just decomposing on the ground. And that's a very untenable situation for us due to the way that our minds function and the emotions that we have, where it would be very difficult, for example, to just take one of your loved ones out back in the backyard and let them decompose in the grass for a few months, right? Like, it's just an untenable situation for the way that our minds are structured. So we got to do something for mundane sanitary reasons as well. But I do always have some type of feeling when I think of the idea of someone in a mortuary putting embalming fluid in a body like it's a mummy and, makeup on the body so it looks good when they present it. And just the whole ritual of that seems like that's probably not what we're supposed to be doing. And again, I don't know enough to suggest an alternative, but that just seems a little off, I got to admit. But you have all of these more spiritual considerations about what's happening with whatever remains of you when you leave the body, and what is the best thing to do with the body in that connection to make sure that everything goes the way it's supposed to according to the original design. And of course, some cultures have instructions along these lines. I'm sure you guys have heard of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as it's referred to, and other things like that. Now, are they any more right than anyone else? I wouldn't imagine so. And given the cultures that type of thing comes from and everything else that they believe, do they have death right? I mean, maybe. But at the same time, probably missing some of the pieces too with the various things that they do. But anyway, enough of that stuff. We don't need to talk about that anymore. Thinking about all of that, seeing the massive cemetery and the burial plot, and just knowing that we're all headed there, no matter what we think about it or what we distract ourselves with, all the drama that comes along in people's lives that they exert so much energy towards, it's all a one big distraction from the fact that one day you're not going to exist. And when you really internalize that, you can start to readjust your approach to life and relationships and everyone you're involved with in a much more present way, in a way where you don't hold anything back and you are really in the moment with these people whenever you see them, because you know how fleeting of an existence this is. It could end at any time. It could end for me right now driving in this car. Someone could just come crash into me and boom, it's over. Right? We can be gone in one moment. The fragility of the experience, I suppose, is part of the beauty of it, if you understand that in the way that it is supposed to be understood. But thinking about these things, going through the thought process, I really started to think about the human mind and the brain in particular. Now, obviously, whatever it is that is aware right now speaking to you is not being created by the brain. It's just kind of the center of the conscious experience because it controls so much of the body. And obviously your senses are mostly present in the head area where the brain is. So all the senses are decoding things in that area, and then your thoughts are going through your stream of consciousness in the same area. So scientists and other people who study these things have for a long time said, well, consciousness must be being created somewhere in the brain, and we just haven't figured it out yet. In any event, wherever that awareness is being picked up in the body through its various antennas, and we are perceiving it through, when that awareness leaves the body, again, we don't know what happens, but what got me thinking about the brain in particular in that context is how we don't know any of these answers. And why would that be the case? Why would death be so difficult for us in a way that it presumably isn't for all the other species that are currently residing on this planet? And we can assume that I'm talking about all of the species that were naturally designed to be here, not anything that's been genetically created in a lab somewhere by crossbreeding different things and things like that. Let's talk about just the real animals and other species that were originally designed to be in this place. And we might include monkeys in that as one of the original primates that was designed to just be on planet Earth. Presumably, those primates don't have any of the existential dread about one day they might not exist anymore that we have. So what is the difference? Well, I was thinking about it, and it's like, if you view viruses as a form of nanotechnology, which I think they obviously are, you look into what they are and what they do and where they say they come from in comparison to that, and it's like, no, these have all been created in a lab, and they are designed to change things in the body or create certain conditions in the body. Oftentimes with malice aforethought, which is a fancy way of saying bad intent beforehand. If viruses are nanotechnology in that way, and what we refer to as the human brain didn't always used to be the size that it is, and indeed they have isolated the genetic sequences that enhance or increase brain size now, and they've actually done it to other species in experiments. So if we take all of that together, is it possible then that the brain itself that we are experiencing so much of reality through is a form of technology? It's something that was created like you would create a computer hard drive, right? It's something that boosts the ability to maintain information, and which then by default makes something smarter, because when you have memories, you can learn. Now, we could have a debate there about the animals and other species that are in the moment with the original communication system that was designed into Earth, and how they probably are more aware and in tune with how they were intended to be functioning than we are, because they don't have any of those memories weighing them down. Their brains are much smaller, and they don't have the storage capacity that we have. And while they are more intuitive in the moment, they might not have the ability to imagine on the level that we have it too, right? Because that's the flip side of having memory, is you have the ability to imagine the future, which is where all of our creations come from, right? They come from the imagination, where someone thinks of an idea, they envision it in their mind, and then they bring it into physical reality. And that process has been abused for a long time here, of course. But in general, if you removed the intent to turn it into something that it wasn't designed to be, the process of imagination is something wonderful, right? Where you can just imagine with the right intent something beautiful. and then go and create it, bring it into existence. Now, the animals do this in their own way with the various little civilizations that they create, their beehives and their ant farms and their schools that they swim around in. They have their own structure that their brain capacity allows them to create. And it is as advanced as anything we have done on their scale. But still, look around at what's going on planet Earth. The human mind has very clearly become the dominant apex predator in the physical realm, at least. And we can do whatever we want to do and just dominate nature in any way that we see fit. And I use the term we loosely there, right? I'm referring to that which is in control currently and how they treat the Earth. It really does seem along those lines like the human brain as we know it is made as a form of technology that was sort of spliced into primate bodies on this planet to create it. And then the end result is who we are right now. We're this mix of this advanced brain computer processing system inside a primate body. And that gives us all of these really strange dichotomies at work where we're capable of these very animalistic acts that are so far removed from logic and reason, at the same time that we can have that very intelligent, measured view of something that is removed from basic instincts like that the wild brings out of an animal when it's placed within it. Well, when it's placed within a food chain that requires life to consume life anyway, right? It's very violent and predatory. And we're mirroring that in the way that we behave. But to my point about the brain being technology, we dress it up and market it in a way that it's all very normal and not predatory. And I'm sure most of you listening to this have heard a lot about the various Anunnaki stories that are out there, kind of creation myths about where we come from, which essentially say, hey, the human race is a slave race that was created for these purposes. They upgraded the brain to match something closer to what they have, whoever it was that did this, so that we could carry out various functions that an ordinary primate being, which at the time was the most intelligent land mammal, was capable of. So they take the most intelligent being, which was these primate monkeys, and we know that now from the various experiments that have been done where apes and other primates are capable of learning language and having conversations in their own way, in a very similar way to how human beings do it. So just extrapolate that out. You splice a few genes via nanotechnology into these primates, and eventually a human being is created. And then you have all this residual evidence, like I've gone into in the past, about how the human brain, when it comes out of the birth canal, is now too big for the birth canal. And you have females dying in childbirth because they're pushing out this head that it wasn't originally designed to push out. Now, does that mean that it was done technologically at some point in the past? No, not necessarily. That could have been some kind of random leap in evolution at some point, but more likely than not, this was intentionally done via nanotechnology at some point. But the Anunnaki thing is so filled with disinformation that I think it does more harm than good as it relates to figuring out what's going on here. And that mostly relates to Zecharia Sitchin, who went to the London School of Economics at the same time that George Soros did, which gives you a little idea about how they do this and structure it, where they all go to the same schools and then they're given their various tasks along those lines, and they kind of separate after school and do what they're told or supposed to do. So George Soros goes on to do what he's supposed to do, and then Zecharia Sitchin plays his sort of less important role to be the one who talks about the Anunnaki and that whole thing and provides disinformation about it. And while I'm on the subject, I should bring up the fact that I talk a lot about how they plan this stuff way in advance of when we actually see it. And that's true, but that kind of also implies that every single person that is in some way involved in it knew about it beforehand and was directly responsible for it along those lines. And it's like, well, that's probably a simplistic way to view it, because I'm sure along the way they recruit various people into the agenda that are not a part of the bloodline. And I experienced this on my own when I was in college, so I know it's partially true on some level, where I had a professor who recruited me to attend the London School of Economics when I was a senior. I was figuring out what I wanted to do, and we were having a conversation along those lines, and he said, well, you should apply to the London School of Economics. And I didn't know anything about it, and after the conversation, I went and researched it a little bit and, looked up the famous alumni, and I have to admit it was very alluring because it was impressive, the list of names there. And he ultimately told me this along those lines, like, hey, you'll be able to do whatever you want if you go there. And the next time I talked to him, I said something along the lines of, okay, well, I've been doing a little research on this, and I don't know if my grades and just everything about my profile here is good enough to be admitted to the London School of Economics. And he said, oh, that's no big deal. Like I told you, I went there, and I'll just write you a letter of recommendation, and you'll get in, I promise you. And I was like, oh, okay. Didn't quite know how to respond to that in the moment. It was flattering, of course, but then I kind of started thinking, well, why? Why do you want me to go so bad? And I just posed that question to him, and he said, well, you remind me of me. And at the time, I didn't understand what he meant by that. It was only much later that I came to understand, oh, he saw in me what he saw in himself. And because he was involved in the agenda, he knew that I would be a good asset as far as manipulating other people into what they wanted to have happen. In the little way that I would do it, right? However, they would mold my mind to position me in the place that they wanted me so that I would naively but earnestly influence people into their agenda working in some way, shape, or form. And it's just funny how things work. I was seriously considering it, and then I met a girl and decided to stay here and didn't want to leave the country. It's like, oh, okay, I can see why that happened now, to keep me in America and not go down that path. Anyways, I brought all of that up because I very easily could have been swept up into this thing if my path hadn't unfolded like it did, and I eventually became aware of what was going on. But if that had never happened, I very easily would have probably found myself involved in it in some way, shape, or form, just as a professional in some capacity. So that's happening on some level, but at the same time, I don't want to say that and excuse most of the people you see on television or in positions of power, because they know what they're doing when they get to that level, at least in part. But anyway, I got sidetracked on the whole Anunnaki thing, Zecharia Sitchin. Yes, there are ideas out there along these lines, and it's kind of similar to the Book of Enoch that goes into more detail about the fallen angels, which you could essentially swap with Anunnaki, right? It's kind of the same thing, though most people who are biblical scholars along these lines are just very into the Christian religion along those lines. They would say, oh, well, that's disinformation. They want you to pay attention to this more alien idea, so you don't pay attention to the fact that, no, this is fallen angels controlled by Satan, the original fallen angel. And I want to be accurate and correct in what I'm saying, but going back to the beginning, I don't know what's really going on. I don't know what label I should give this thing that is self-evidently in control here. Your guess is as good as mine. Call it whatever you want. I think Satan is the easiest term because everybody kind of knows what that implies. But you could view it in the same way. The fallen angels were forbidden from mating with the human beings that existed at the time. And as the story goes, they did that and kind of created the situation that's currently existing on the planet. And if you view that as a metaphor for genetic manipulation through technology, well, yeah, the fallen angels mated with human beings. They gave us their DNA, very literally, in the form of our brain, which is a technology, when viewed from that perspective. And I think that is truly why we have so much trouble with the idea of death or not existing at some point. Before I was born here, I didn't know any of this was going on. I had no idea anybody who had ever existed actually existed. I didn't know about it, at least presumably, right? Maybe there's some kind of amnesia memory wipe going on here just to give us the experience and make it new in that way. It would kind of be cheating to know everything that had happened from a very young age and live your life that way, which we could get into as far as the bloodlines that carry out, quote-unquote, Satan's agenda here, what they might be given on some level to know and maintain everything that they've learned throughout all of their various incarnations here. That could be part of immortality that they are promised. And that would explain why they want to merge with machines so badly, because then they wouldn't have to jump from body to body to body with those incarnations in what is probably a pretty brutal process to have those memories as a child and have to wait until your body catches up so you can actually use them in some way. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going on. That's just a theoretical possibility. But if you were in that situation, you would pretty badly want to merge with a machine that could hold your consciousness, and then you wouldn't have to jump through the bodies, every 90 to 100 years. Or alternatively, Satan, quote unquote, would want that situation to exist so it could jump into a body. Theoretically, it's on a scale that is disembodied, and it wouldn't be able to interact directly, but if we created, through our imagination, these bodies that merge man and machine together, genetically speaking, kind of in the same way that the brain was originally technology that started the whole thing in the first place. Well, now we're taking the brain and sort of wiring it electronically and connecting it to Wi-Fi, and then having it be connected to all the other technology in a way that consciousness can just stay in a body that never dies. And you can see how that would be the next step in the evolution there. From the perspective of something that wanted to either jump into this place and kind of operate within it in a more physical way, or from the perspective of the street muscle enforcers that orchestrate the whole thing for whatever is ultimately in control here. That's a way for them to just stay in the same body. Sorry, I was passing a very loud truck there. To just stay in the same body and not have to deal with that whole process. And ultimately, those people, those bloodlines, are suffering from the same thing that I was getting into earlier about the existential threat that not existing eventually in this body presents to people, because they know that they have given themselves to whatever is in control here, and they think there's no escape, right? They think they're trapped. And if you're in that situation, trapped here, and you're really worried about what's coming next, right, because of what you've done, then you would just want to stay here eternally, right? You would want to be in that body that will never die. So you can just stay here, and you never have to face that sort of judgment, which they might avoid temporarily through the various repeated incarnations. into different human bodies. Again, I don't know if that's happening. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is. But that at least makes logical sense why they would be pushing transhumanism so fiercely, why they want it so badly, and why everything that's going on is leading us in that direction. Right? You have two trends converging together. You have the continued development of this technology through what they call artificial intelligence, and how that ties into everything being turned into a quote-unquote smart device, and how it's constantly seeking out more data to put into the system and make the system more self-sufficient and smarter and more able to control in that way. And then at the same time, you have the blurring of the line of what it means to be male or female, turning the idea of androgyny into something normal and palpable that everyone can point at and see an example of. And just giving people the choice of choosing what they want their body to be. And by seeding the idea that a man can choose to be a woman or a woman can choose to be a man, and children are capable of making this decision, well, now you've made it normal for someone to choose to merge their body into a machine. Right? Do you see what I'm saying there? How that has created the ability to choose that? And people won't even think twice about it eventually? And that will help the normalization of a body that is man and machine, because people are used to eventually looking at a woman who used to be a man and a man who used to be a woman, and it doesn't quite look right. It looks androgynous to a certain extent. And that's priming you for the androgynous machine man along those lines. So I can't explain what's really happening, the real reasoning behind it. I can only point at what I see all around me and try to create my own logical reasoning and justification for it. But I think that's the root of why we have this issue with not existing at some point. Like I said, at one point, it was like I went to sleep and woke up and there was something in the middle there, but I don't know what it was. And that was kind of me before I was born here. At least as far as I know, I wasn't anywhere perceiving this place or conscious of it. It just was existing without me there. And then eventually I woke up into it. And now I'm here observing it and learning all about it and learning who was here before. And I see their monuments and their statues, which is why they're so obsessed with those things, right? So you remember them in this place. And I'm learning about the whole thing now that I'm here, and then eventually I just won't be here anymore, right? And okay, now I'm gone. And we get so worried about that, but it's like, hey, that's just the way that it is, right? And you leave your most important impact on those who you interact with through that process, and they'll remember you, even if it's only one person that you had an impact on along those lines, and they carry you forward in their memory, which is pretty cool. So all I would say to you is make it a good memory, right? Stop with all the petty drama. Stop with all of those things that leads to fractures in personal relationships. Just let that all go, man. Start creating some beautiful memories that will transcend time and space, that will exist far longer than you will in this meat suit that will eventually no longer function. And your awareness will leave it and not even be aware of this place anymore, most likely. Again, I have no idea. I can't speak to what happens, but you probably won't be conscious of what's going on here. Unless there's like some etheric aspect to awareness being kind of stuck in various places because of what we unknowingly do with the bodies and the whole death process that we're doing ignorantly because we truly don't know what we should be doing. But I think that's where it ultimately comes from. It's the fact that our mind itself is technology that is not designed to be in existence originally here. So we have, for all intents and purposes, an alien mind in this primate body that wasn't supposed to be here. And so we have all of this struggle with just existing here. And part of it is the hard drive that stores memories and it can imagine the future, and we have all these memories of the fact that we will no longer be here anymore because we've seen people leave, and then we imagine that's going to happen to us at some point, and that's what creates the existential dread. Right? Oh my god, I'm not going to exist at some point. Did I do enough? Blah blah blah, right? I think that's the root of it. Maybe. I don't know. This is all speculation. Just hypothesis. It's a technology in your head that wasn't designed to be here originally, and we're dealing with the aftermath of that. And also, interestingly, the fallen angels, as it were, who seeded us with this technology, who created them, right? I mean, well, they originally were a creation of that which created us. And that which created us is aware of this problem that's going on here on some level, or else we wouldn't even know it's a problem, right? We've been told through various sources that there's a major problem going on here, and slowly over time, people are becoming aware of the issue, and eventually we will come to terms with it, and a solution will be presented. What that will be, I don't know, beyond my pay grade. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too hard on your insane mind, okay? Because it's quite literally, most likely, a form of technology that you weren't supposed to even be aware of in the first place. It's something advanced that was placed into a body that wasn't meant to be able to deal with it. It doesn't even know how to deal with it, which is why we're all so crazy. we don't even know how to deal with the power that's in our brains. It's like sitting down to a brand new computer that has all of these capabilities and abilities, and you have no idea where to even start. You can't handle it. Or like a car, because I'm in one of those right now, that's so powerful that only the 1% top drivers in the world would be able to handle the power of it and not immediately crash it into a wall. It's kind of similar along those lines. And I think we're getting better at handling it when we don't let it control us. And that's all a part of paying attention to your thoughts and being mindful of them and seeing the influence on you when it's there, and not being confined to the past or dwelling on things that you have regrets about, or all of that, right? Just dwelling in your memories in a way that it consumes you, or dwelling in the potential futures in the form of anxiety that consumes you as well. This is the very real wisdom that has been co-opted by New Age circles about being in the moment, because it truly is all that exists, at least without this technology in our minds that gives us access to the past and the imagined future. As they say, nobody gets out of this place alive, so try to make the best of it and don't get too caught up in everything that's going on up there in your brain. I say that as I have made you listen to this whole thing up there and consider all of these things, and now think about them after I turn this off. What can I say? I'm a hypocrite. But hopefully what I went into here will help with that process in the long run. At least that was my intent anyway. So that's it. Later.